Today, the subcommittee meets to discuss the future of Air Force long-range strike capabilities and employment concepts. Our distinguished panel of guests testifying today includes Lieutenant General retired Robert J. Elder, Jr., Ph.D., the faculty of George Mason University. Also, Mr. Mark Gunzinger, Senior Fellow of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, and Dr. Rebecca Grant, President, IRIS Independent Research. These distinguished guests, we're glad to have you here. You've all done a lot of great work in this area, and we look forward to your testimony this afternoon. During World War II, America gained the ability to strike targets at long range with its massive bomber force. The Air Force flew thousands of conventional daylight precision bombing missions over Europe and Asia. Crossing thousands of miles of ocean, the war in the Pacific was brought to a decisive end by the nuclear strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From that point, the United States maintained the robust conventional and nuclear long-range strike capabilities needed to deter the aggression of hostile states and assure the security of our allies around the globe. As the threat environment evolved, so have our capabilities. Stealth and precision standoff weapons enable our Navy and Air Force to penetrate anti-access environments. Our increasing ability to process, exploit, and disseminate intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance information help deter future conflicts and de-escalate regional tensions. That said, our long-range strike capabilities must evolve further to address the range of challenges posed by the rapid and threatening rise of China, a resurgent and expansionist Russia, a subversive and terrorist supporting Iran, and an unpredictable and provocative North Korea. China, Russia, and North Korea are established nuclear powers, and Iran, regardless of the negotiated P5 agreement, remains a nuclear threat in the not-so-distant future. Adding to this complex security environment, I'm concerned about Russia and China rapidly fielding highly capable integrated air defense systems and other anti-access capabilities. The proliferation of these weapon systems is eroding our ability to perform long-range strike with our legacy bomber fleet and standoff precision weapons, thus diminishing our ability to deter and respond to aggression. The current state of our bomber force is of great concern. The newest B-52 bomber is 53 years old. In at least one Air Force family, 3 generations of airmen have pivoted the fortress in combat engagements, from Vietnam to enduring freedom. As of September 2015, our Air Force bomber force structure consists of 158 total bombers, 63 B-1s, 20 B-2s, and 76 B-52 aircraft, with an average age of 39 years. Of the total, only 96 are currently funded for combat service. The Air Force plans on recapitalizing B-1 and B-52 force structure with a smaller fleet of 80 to 100 long-range strike bombers. As we grapple with the proliferation of anti-access systems and contested environments, dwindling force structure and continuing budget constraints and uncertainty, it's critically important that we identify the long-range strike capabilities and concepts that we need for the future. Once again, I want to thank our witnesses for participating in our hearing this afternoon, and I look forward to discussing this important topic. With that, I turn to my good friend and colleague, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Joe Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing on our Air Force long-range strike capabilities. Given the impending award of the contract for the long-range strike bomber in the coming weeks, this is an excellent opportunity to discuss the future of this critical part of our nation's power projection abilities. The Air Force long-range bomber fleet has long provided our nation with a flexible and effective deterrent tool, from composing one of the 3 legs of our strategic triad to providing a full complement of conventional long-range strike options for decision makers. The ability to project power and convincingly strike from far distances is one of the most important components of our military arsenal today. Our long-range strike fleet, composed of our B-52s, B-1s, and B-2s, are also amongst the oldest aircraft in inventory today. However, the current timeline projects that the long-range strike bomber will not actually be ready for operations until 2030, adding 15 years to the average ages of our existing bombers, effectively making the B-52 eligible for Social Security by the time the long-range strike bomber comes online. I'm interested in hearing from our witnesses about the kinds of ideas they have regards to sustaining our current fleet in the years before the new bomber comes online, as well as lessons that we should draw from the longevity of these aircraft as they would apply to this new class. The strategic importance of demonstrating our nation's long-range strike capability cannot be overstated, especially as it applies to the Asia-Pacific region. As noted by one of our witnesses today, Lieutenant General Elder, our bombers were an important part of deterring North Korean saber rattling in 2013, when B-52 bombers flew 6,500 miles from Missouri to South Korea to drop bombs on a test range. North Korea quickly toned down its threatening rhetoric, and the bombers effectively deterred further provocation in a volatile region. As our near-peer competitors, especially China, develop formidable anti-access aerial denial technologies, our ability to maintain a military advantage hinges on our ability to penetrate those defenses. I hope our witnesses will share their views with the committee on how the long-range strike bomber and long-range strike capabilities generally fit into the strategic priorities of the Asia-Pacific rebalance. This new program is going to occur at a time of intense budget pressure, not just within the Air Force alone, but also the entirety of the Department of Defense. Yet with the aircraft expected to be in service well into this century, it is important that we get this right. As such, it is important that this panel and this nation fully understand the challenges ahead and the options available to ensure that we retain a credible and robust long-term strike capabilities well into the future. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Joe. And I guess we're in a lineup. If you guys are comfortable, we'll start with General Elder and work our way across. And General, we look forward to any comments that you may be willing to offer us today.
Sorry. And Congressman Courtney, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's a privilege to have been offered this opportunity to talk with you today about the value of the long-range strike bomber to U.S. national security. As both of you already mentioned, our capabilities are withering, and we have less than 100 combat-ready bombers with an average age of 38 years. Quite frankly, the older bombers we have are simply not survivable in the face of modern air defenses, and as you pointed out, we're going to have to live with them for quite a bit longer. The newer B-52s remain potent but are few in number, and my belief, quite frankly, is that the 80 to 100 aircraft number is not going to be enough to replace the B-1 and B-52 fleet, even though its capability against a target set will be greater, but what amounts to the rotational commitments are, it's not going to satisfy that. Unlike most military systems which are designed to provide utility for a small number of missions, bombers provide value in times of peace, crisis, and conflict. It takes many different platforms combined to do all the things that a bomber can do. Long-range strike bombers serve as a global strike air sensor platform, but they're distinctly capable of providing a range of effects against dynamic targets anywhere on the globe, and they can use their own organic cueing. Study after study has shown that bombers do more than simply strike targets. They offer structural stability for both conventional and nuclear scenarios, and as you point out, provide the most flexible component of the U.S. strategic triad, and they are the best way to reassure allies of our commitment to extended deterrence because they can signal. In other words, the bomber is more than just a strike and sensor platform. It is also a powerful tool of diplomacy. Long-range strike capabilities provide the nation practical alternatives for global security and regional stability and provide combatant commanders increased effectiveness in the conduct of joint operations across the full range of conflict. They are absolutely critical for our national security, and because of their versatility, I believe they provide the nation exceptional value, and look forward to getting your questions, Mr. Chairman.
General, thank you. Mr. Gunzinger.
Yes, Chairman Forbes, Ranking Member Courtney, members of the subcommittee, thank you as well for inviting us to talk to you today about this really important topic. I'd like to suggest a framework that might help you think about the LRSB and other capabilities in long-range strike family of systems. And what I postulate is two competitions. One we call the hiders-finders competition, the other is the salvo competition. Now, the hiders-finders competition, what that is about is developing capabilities to penetrate contested airspace, contested areas, and an enemy, a thinking enemy, who develops countermeasures. It's a cycle. As we develop advantages, they develop countermeasures. And keeping advantage in that cycle, in this competition, is critically important. In the 1950s, for example, the B-52 was designed about then. 1952, I think, was the first flight. The most significant threat to our bombers was aircraft, interceptors, and surface-to-air fires, artillery. So the B-52 was designed to fly at high altitudes, and they gave it a gun and a tail to defend against fighters. Until SAM's surface-to-air missiles came on the scene in the latter half of that decade in the early 1960s. So the Air Force adapted and started flying B-52s at low altitudes so it could terrain mask and hide in ground clutter, and fighters couldn't find them effectively. And it designed the B-1 to be a low-altitude, high-speed sprinter to penetrate contested airspace. Until about 1979, DoD announced that, well, Russia, or Soviet Union, has developed look-down, shoot-down radars for its fighters, capable of finding our bombers at low altitude. So they started a program called the Advanced Technology Bomber Program, which led to the B-2 program to buy 139 B-2s to replace the B-52, and that would be a high-altitude stealthy penetrator. 1990, end of the Soviet Union, we essentially disengaged from this competition. DoD shifted its attention to preparing to fight two regional conflicts against North Korea, Iran, Iraq. They didn't have advanced air defenses. So while it continued to invest in stealth technologies for future platforms, it stopped the B-2 buy at 21 aircraft. And it also shifted the weight of its effort in terms of strike campaigns towards its fighter forces, under the assumption that, well, we'll be able to deploy our fighter forces very quickly into a theater conflict, stage them at bases on the borders of our enemies to bring the high volume fires. We just didn't need the bombers to do that after the opening stages of a conflict. The problem is our competitors didn't stop. China, Russia, Iran, and others have developed advanced air defenses, developed them or bought them, that are a real challenge to our current force. So while we modified our current bomber force to stay current and give it new radars and so on over the intervening years, we didn't invest in a new bomber. Now, the second competition is what we call the salvo competition, and that occurs between two adversaries who both have PGMs. Not just the ability to attack with precision, but also defend against the PGMs of an enemy. And that's the situation we have today, certainly with Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. They have capabilities to attack our bases in the Western Pacific and the Middle East, all of them. So the assumption that we made, DoD made in the 90s, that, well, we'll rely mostly for strike on our fighters and we'll stage them really close to bases, those bases are now at risk. That's an increasingly risky proposition. But we can compensate for that by beginning to use bases that are further away from our adversaries that, frankly, are out of the most immediate threat, out of range of those short-range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. And we can also disperse our fighter forces at those close-in bases to expeditionary airfields, civil airfields suitable for military use as well as military airfields, to complicate the targeting problem of our enemies who have their own PGMs. So what this suggests, both the hydrofighter competition and the salvo competition, is we might start thinking about reversing priorities that we established for bombers and fighters back in the 1990s. Perhaps future air campaigns, the weight of the strike should be provided by long-range strike capabilities that are stealthy and have large payloads staged at more distant bases, whereas our fighters at the close-in dispersed posture provide counter-air, help kick down the door, provide close air support, and other missions, rather than relying on those fighters, which have about 1/10 the payload of a bomber and 1/5 the range of a bomber, primarily for strike. The Air Force has made a great start, and DoD has as well, at re-engaging in both these competitions with the LRSB. But it is just a start, and it is only one element of the long-range strike family system, which I hope we can get into in your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Dr. Grant.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. As my colleagues have said, the America's Bomber Force is one of the truly unique tools of our national security and our international diplomacy. Sadly, today we have, at any one time, only 16 combat-ready B-2 bombers that are able to take on the most heavily defended types of targets. And it is this situation that we are setting out to correct. I want to speak just very briefly to the capabilities and employment concepts of the bomber, and then touch on how the Air Force will manage this program. The first capability, of course, is access, and that does still very much mean stealth. Stealth remains a fundamental design requirement, and we should expect to see improved stealth techniques that have advanced beyond the B-2 and will include electronic warfare and other state-of-the-art survivability techniques. Range and payload, of course, are what define a bomber and separate it from other types of aircraft. Recall that every bomber designed has had to make a trade-off from the B-17 right to the B-2. So we may expect to see, of course, excellent range, but that will be defined as range from leaving the tanker track. Payload will be a mix of munitions, both the small, precise munitions and the heavier munitions for hardened and deeply buried targets. We don't know what parameters the Air Force has chosen this time, but we will expect to see something that has perhaps blurred the distinctions between global and theater attack. Also, I think highly important and new in this long-range strike bomber program will be an open software architecture. That will be very important because this bomber will be new in its communications and data link relay abilities. It should be able to immediately join not only with SATCOM, but the aerial layer networks, those IP-enabled networks that now define the gold standard in battlespace communications. We expect, of course, for this bomber to roll off with the basics of nuclear capability installed, but to proceed to certify that capability quite a bit later after it completes initial flight test. Most of all, I want to see some upgrade capacity here in the winning design. Our bomber will reach initial operating capability perhaps in the mid-2020s or just a touch later, but continue to operate and fly missions until 2055 and beyond. This bomber, therefore, has to have the ability to do what's asked of it now and also to do a bit more as we look for upgrades and new mission capabilities over time. And that means planning now for the airframe with the classic power, space, and cooling and ability to accommodate those upgrades. What will this bomber do specifically? It will, of course, participate in the battle space under Joint Force Commander direction. It will draw on ISR, on tankers, and many other things. It will be dependent on stealth fighters, too. But it will have some very unique roles, and those include direct attack, the ability to drop a bomb, not a cruise missile per se, because cruise missiles and other standoff weapons are not always capable of taking out every type of target this bomber may be assigned to strike. We expect that targets in the future, the most difficult, will be a combination of mobile and of separate, deeply buried targets. This is a very tough target set, and we need a penetrating bomber with the ability to take out those targets and hold them at risk. We also will see perhaps extensive target sets, a consideration we might not have thought through 5 years ago. But the bomber force here remains a unique strategic tool. It will have to do things like suppress airfields, counter enemy air defenses, and perhaps help hunt, destroy, and contain enemy surface naval vessels and submarines. This points us towards a highly capable force, but one that also is big enough to be persistent across these missions. And I echo General Elder's concern. 80 to 100 is a start. I think closer to 150 might be better to assure the persistence and sortie generation. Let me conclude with a remark about risk reduction and how the Air Force will manage this program. We all are awaiting a down select, and we want to see the best possible stewardship of this important national security capability. The Air Force says that it has taken a rather different approach with this bomber. It has funded both teams to conduct extensive risk reduction of the designs. What this means to us is that the winning design will be far more mature than other types of aircraft programs, and specifically, I believe, quite a bit more mature than the B-2 at a comparable stage of development. This winning design should go into EMD with some critical work already carried out. For instance, the Air Force has said that they have identified specific risk areas to include propulsion integration, that's the engines, and integration of apertures and antennae, and conducted specific risk reduction work in these areas. This again marks a bold and different approach, something that quite distinct from what we saw with B-2, F-22, or F-35. This means that the Department of Defense's final choice of a winner should reflect analysis of capability, of the ability to proceed quickly through engineering, manufacturing, and development, and it should also reflect some analysis of the winning team's ability to proceed directly towards manufacturing. To sum it up, the Air Force appears to have taken a rather bold approach, and what this means is we should expect to see a far more mature design. That should also give us, in the end, confidence in two things. One is the ability to adhere to cost targets from the EMD phase forward, And second is that the Air Force should be certain that its winning design truly has those mandated capabilities and the extra margins that it needs, not only for upgrade capacity for the future, power, cooling, et cetera. Of course, there are many things in the end that can affect a program, but the risk reduction is unique in this case, has been carried out with great deal of forethought, and I think should give us a very confident basis from which to proceed to develop a new long-range strike bomber. Thank you.
Right before we go to Mr. Courtney for his questions, can all three of you give us your thoughts about what happens if we don't get this long-range strike capability? And number two, how do you assess so far the process that we've used to get here as you look at the Air Force and what they've done? What's your thoughts on that? General Elder?
Mr. Chairman, it's an interesting question. I think the nation will be in quite a bind, quite frankly, if, particularly with the threats that you highlighted in your initial remarks, if we don't get this new capability, the long-range strike bomber. There's a perception that things aren't too bad right now. We seem to be holding things in check with the current force structure, but the reality is that our adversaries do know how to go after our strengths, and they're looking for ways to exploit that. And it actually, as Mark Gunzinger pointed out, this going back and forth, the LRSB is a huge jump over where they are in terms of their ability to counter. So it's going to be important from that standpoint. But I also believe that as a nation, the types of things we do, when we talk about our ability compared to others, what perhaps makes us a superpower is this capability to operate globally. And these other airplanes we have are getting too old, and so we basically will wither down to where we basically in the future will only have the B-2 fleet and then forces that we can deploy. These deployable forces are very important, but they provide a capability to operate globally, but they don't give you a global capability. And certainly from a time standpoint, in terms of giving options to the president, any adversary knows that there's going to be this long period of time for you to be able to get there. And I think that's going to raise huge concerns among our allies who are counting on us, not only in some cases for nuclear umbrellas, but also for kind of a strategic stability globally. And of course, the bombers have been working for years now with the sea forces in terms of providing stability, particularly in the Pacific, but not only there in Europe and in the Central Command region as well. So I think it would be disastrous for the nation for us to not get this new airplane. It's going to be critical to our national security in the future. In terms of the process that was used, it's interesting that one of the challenges that we've had when you try to bring out these new technologies and you want these new technologies to give you this asymmetric advantage, that asymmetric advantage works for a period of time until the adversary knows what they are, and then they're going to start trying to work to use counters. So the one good thing about this approach for sure is that this whole period of time, the adversary knows that something new is being developed, but they have no opportunity to even start thinking about how they might counter it. There's a lot of discussion of ways that it could be approached, but those things all depend on pretty fragile knowledge of how that would happen. So from a standpoint of trying to protect the way this airplane is going to give us this asymmetric increase in capability, I think it's a good thing we've done this because it basically saves the government a lot of money. It also means that when this airplane is produced, it has quite a bit more capability from the get-go. The second thing, which is actually something that Dr. Grant pointed out, the airplane is designed to be able to continue to evolve with technology and with new threats because of the open architecture design. And so once the airplane is something that people can actually see and our adversaries can see, we will know that they'll start working to look at ways to counter that. But it will be much easier with this platform than platforms we've had in the past to be able to bring those changes in and continue to maintain the LRSB as a relevant platform for a very long time.
Excellent question. I'm going to give you the U.S. perspective from the U.S. and an enemy's perspective on this question. First, we throw around numbers about the size of the force and how many are combat capable and total aircraft inventory and so forth. Today, our nation can launch about 12 B-2 sorties on any given day. If B-2s have to operate from Guam or Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, that's about 12 sorties. That is our nation's long-range penetrating strike capability and a handful of standoff cruise missiles. If we don't buy the LRSB, well, the B-2 eventually will not be able to penetrate into China, into Iran, and some other areas. The B-1s and B-52s already can't penetrate into those higher threat areas. So we will be a nation that will be able to fight on the periphery of some of our potential adversaries in the future. From the enemy's perspective, it would create a one-dimensional problem for them. Now, all they have to do is defend against these standoff capabilities. They can project power out to attack our bases, to attack our aircraft orbiting, to launch standoff cruise missiles and so forth. They don't have to defend their interior. Those deep targets are not at risk. So they can pour their money into their outer defenses and into offensive capabilities instead of having to defend their interior. So that would not help us impose costs on an enemy at all.
How do you assess where the Air Force has come so far in this process?
In the process, in my opinion, the Air Force has taken a very deliberate and careful path. It has chosen an unusual and very, I think, successful acquisition strategy as it works through the process of taking the two teams down to contract award. I personally wish that the Air Force and the Department of Defense would minimize some of the classification around the acquisition aspects of the program. Obviously not jeopardizing national security capabilities, but I would like to see the Department of Defense tell us a bit more about how they have conducted this process. Based on what the Air Force has said, they have taken unusual steps to take risk reduction much further than in any program we have seen in many a decade.
Good. Mr. Courtney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of just trying to assess the value, which the chairman's first question certainly zeroed in on, obviously this program's ability to operate jointly with other branches in terms of the Navy or ground forces. I was just wondering if you could maybe help us sort of understand the value from that aspect.
But
Oh, go ahead. That is a great question, and one of the things about this particular airplane, although when you're operating in a contested environment, people are shooting at you, you definitely don't want to present yourself as an easy target. But if you were to look today, even where it's relatively an uncontested environment in Afghanistan, and you look at where the bulk of support to our ground forces there is coming from, it actually is coming from B-1s that are providing that close air support. That wasn't really that easy to do before we had the weapons that we have today, but they've got the same type of targeting pods that the fighters have. They have the GPS guided weapons, but the big thing they can do is they can persist for a long time and they can get there quickly, and because of that, you can provide quite a bit of coverage. So it's invaluable from that standpoint. If this were a contested environment, those airplanes wouldn't be able to just loiter there because they would become targets themselves. So having that advanced stealth, while not going to be a panacea, but they will have a capability to operate that our current platforms would have difficulty being able to operate in. From a naval standpoint, there's a different way of looking at this, and it goes back to, although I guess it's going a little bit out of vogue now, the whole air-sea battle, but there are advantages to air forces and vulnerabilities, and there are advantages to sea forces and vulnerabilities, but it turns out that when you put those together, they're actually pretty complementary, and that was the whole idea behind air-sea battles. Let's take advantage of some of the things that the maritime forces can do to help make the air forces be more effective and vice versa. This platform, operating in conjunction with maritime forces, is going to be able to do quite a bit. One of the things is as a sensor platform itself, it's actually going to be able to see targets and relay that information back to where a maritime force can be launching weapons as well. And if you understand how special forces operate, there's a nice advantage to that because if you have one group that's actually doing the surveillance and another one's doing the shooting, you don't give away your surveillance position when you shoot, and then you can leave. And so operating together, you're going to have a nice complement there. There's some, without going into any classification, there's a lot of things that maritime forces can do from a sensing standpoint that we wouldn't want to go into detail here, but the committee, I'm sure, is well aware of those. That information can be used to make those bombers more effective and actually also help protect the bombers. So you can see that these different forces, both that have, particularly when you're talking about undersea forces, that have their own kind of stealth, a different kind of stealth, but they are a stealthy force. You put those together, and it provides a very complex environment for an adversary to believe that they could defeat us. And that's useful not only when you actually go to fight, but when someone's trying to think about fighting, they might want to give it a second thought and say, you know, they have so many different ways they can deal with us. We might think we have a leg up on them, but in reality, we can't be sure, because particularly when they put those capabilities together, we have no idea just how significant those forces, the synergistic capabilities that would come from bringing those forces together would be.
Back when the debate was hot and heavy over whether or not we should start a new program, and I was still in the Department of Defense, the Air Force started looking at the problem as a families assistance problem. And it wasn't rhetoric, and it's not rhetoric today. This isn't about what should the Air Force buy to maintain its capability to. It was, what does a joint force need to be able to maintain its capability to strike an enemy deep, to threaten or put at risk all of his most significant targets? And family systems encompasses airborne electronic attack, penetrating ISR capabilities, service-based capabilities, carriers, submarine launch, cruise missiles, the whole family. So it was born out of a concept to develop the future long-range strike family of systems, and also to figure out how it would be integrated in joint operations, not just what it could do to improve Air Force operations, but the joint force operations of the future. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind as you assess the value of the LRSP. It hopefully will be able to execute missions in support of the Navy, for example, anti-surface warfare. Why not have the LRSP capable of launching LRASMs, long-range anti-ship missiles, in the future? They can carry a lot of them, I hope. They will be able to cover large areas at sea, and it'll have great sensors for wide area surveillance, a perfect supporting mission for the Air Force to support the Navy. It may even be able to do future air dominance, given enough space, weight, power, and cooling capacity. Perhaps it could carry air-to-air missiles, and in the future, lasers to help support not just the Air Force, but the Navy to counter enemy aircraft.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, folks, being here. Being the only CPA on the subcommittee panel, I'm trying to do the math. The original version was $550 million a copy. At 31 or 33 billion was the original cost. How do you buy 100 at 550 million apiece for 33 billion? Yes, sir. And how does that get less at 41 billion or 58 billion?
Right. Well, the answer is you don't. The 550 million number was a procurement cost, average procurement cost in FY $10. It did not include EMD. And of course, it did include inflation that will occur year by year. Plus the number that you're citing, I think 33.1 billion, that was between 2015 and 2025. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, so you're not buying 100.
Not by
Okay.
2025, that is correct.
Okay, so Ms. Grant, you mentioned that the Air Force is using a different procurement program that's successful. Maybe I got lost in the conversation, but my most recent think about the F-22 and the F-35, how is the Air Force going to avoid I don't have the years on the F-35, but the F-22, mid-'80s to 2006. So how does Air Force avoid doing that same thing again?
That's a very good question. And the first step of many in that is to go forward with a design that is closer to being ready to produce and go into flight test. And here I applaud what the Air Force says it has done, which is essentially to wait a while on the award process. So instead of, as was the case with B-2 in 1981, with F-22 in 1990, and with F-35 in 2001, you can do this either way, but in those prior programs, the Air Force did less analysis of the contenders prior to EMD. What they say they have now done, building on some lessons of the past decade, and using a different procurement organization, the Rapid Capabilities Office, which is a joint body between, obviously run by DOD, but with DOD and Air Force leadership.
So how does that circumvent the normal procurement processes?
It is within the process, but what it has
Is that the
done,
same group that did the MRAPs and the body armor and that kind of thing?
they apparently have done a great many things, but I'm not sure those specifically. What this has done in this, if I may just address the case of the long-range strike bomber, the Air Force says they have used a smaller team. They have funded both teams to do much more extensive risk reduction work. So they have asked them to analyze not just how this aircraft will look and fly and meet some minimum standards, but to look several layers down into the producibility and maintainability. That's a very important step one. Sir, as you rightly point out, there are many steps to come with this, but moving into EMD with a more mature design is the best possible start for this to really set a new path and get us this capability more quickly and on cost.
From a complexity standpoint, the F-35 was a more complex platform than this, or less complex?
A
Given-
difficult analysis to make. You know what? They're both very complex aircraft, all right?
Okay.
I would say F-35 more complex because of its tri-service and allied requirements. That's not to, and one more thing I think is important for us to understand. The long-range strike bomber will build on the lessons of at least the past 2 decades in development of stealth, integration of AESA radar, and many other things. So I think we're looking at a bomber program that this time is building on things that are already in hand. Maybe even some things you and I don't know about, but that they know about and are able to put this into production more quickly. So I think they have done, by using more mature technology than we have seen in cases where technology had to be developed to meet the requirements. We see really a conservative approach to a great new capability.
Okay, is it fair to say, without describing what we're talking about, that there were certain breakthrough technologies on the F-35 that you won't have to reinvent that wheel on the bomber that would shorten the delivery time?
Right, and sir, obviously, as we haven't done source selection, we don't know what we're talking about, and I'm not an official, but you're absolutely on the right track. What B-2, F-22, and F-35 asked was to develop technologies in order to meet those thresholds. Long-range strike bomber, I think, will have some great new stuff, but is able to take advantage of more mature technology development in several key areas, and that should make it different.
You're back. Oh,
Yes, sir. I absolutely agree. The B-2 and the F-22 are more inventions than the LRSB. LRSB is more of an integration program, whereas taking very mature technologies from other programs, maybe even actual components and engines, and integrating it into a new platform that's going to be much more capable than the B-2 and other systems. And it's also, I think, important to remember that it's been about 10 years since the 2006 Quadrennial Defense Review said, let's start a new program for a penetrating bomber. And there was a previous program to do that was canceled in 2009. But the knowledge and the technologies and the skilled workforce that were dedicated to that effort, they're still around. And they were able to port a lot of that knowledge and technology into this program.
The gentleman's exactly right, though, on the cost situation, and we're going to have a discussion with the Air Force. I don't think there's any bad intention or anything there, but still those numbers, it's a big gap. It bounced up from 33 to 40, I mean, actually 58, and then back down, we think now to about 41 locked in, but still a huge discrepancy. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Graham's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for being here today. We've talked a lot about what's gone into developing the proposed next generation of LRS. Are we also looking at the adaptability for the future so that whoever's seated here 10 years from now isn't talking about an already obsolete LRS that we're again having to invest in and building new aircrafts? Something that I think we all should be focusing on is we know what we are capable of today, but are we looking into the future in order of adaptability so that we're not pouring additional huge amounts of resources into future aircraft sooner than we need to? Thank you so much.
If I may start with that, an excellent question. I think two things are highly important. One, our aircraft today are so information dependent. This new bomber will have a tremendous advantage because it's not like the B-2 that needs to be upgraded to this or B-52. It will come out with that open mission system architecture. That means that we can add devices in almost as easily as we add an app on a phone. So that is a tremendous advantage in keeping it relevant. The Air Force has also said that they intend to fund the science and technology development for continual upgrades and to feed that funding line through. So yes, I think we have every confidence that it will be able to be upgraded and stay relevant across that 40-year service life.
You know, 5 years ago, before there was an LRSB program, I have to caveat I like that, CSBA put out a report on the need for a new bomber and how it might be developed in a different way. And we recommended that the first thing you do is ensure it has enough space, weight, power, and cooling so you could adapt it to new missions, integrate new components in the future, perhaps lasers, for example, to take on the air-to-air missions. But the second thing is to develop it so you can upgrade it or integrate block upgrades over time, to refresh its technologies, to be able to counter new threats as they emerge, to take on new missions. If you design it with the idea that you are going to be able to do these block upgrades over time, then you greatly reduce the risk that when it is produced as on the ramp, it's not going to be outdated. The second thing is it helps you to spread the cost over time as you buy new capabilities through these block upgrades rather than try to get everything into the first model.
Not to beat a dead horse, but one of the things about this airplane is that they really were smart about this. In fact, I was pulling out actually some testimony from Mr. LaPlante, who's the acquisition head for the Air Force. And this has been a big deal for this program, was this concern about the fact that when they buy bombers, they have them for a long time, and they want to make sure that they can continue to bring these new capabilities in. The other thing that Dr. Grant pointed out is about this information piece, but the other thing to realize now, I don't know what the percentage is, but the percentage cost of an airplane these days, or actually any system, military system, a huge amount of this is actually caught up in the software, the code that's being written for these systems. What they're enforcing here is the use of what the Air Force calls open mission systems. The Navy has a slightly different name. It's actually been mandated by OSD, by the department overall, that you would have this. What it allows for is plug and play. They have different levels of integrated capability, but just as for an iPhone or an Android, someone else can write the application besides Apple or Google, for example. You'll have the same thing here, and when someone has a better idea, they'll be able to write that, test that module, and then plug it in. They won't have to go through the complete end-to-end test, which is what driven us to these block upgrades in the past, where it was incrementally done. Now, as soon as you can write these things, you can plug them in. You also can add new systems to the airplanes because they're working with open standards in terms of the plug and play for actual boxes that would go into the airplane. So as we look to the future, as I've mentioned to people in the past, the people in this room have no idea what this airplane is going to be able to do because we haven't given them to the captains yet. When the captains get a hold of this airplane, they're going to say, well, boy, we can do this with this airplane, we can do this. The things that the B-2 does today, a lot of those things were never imagined until it actually got in the hands of these brilliant young captains that think about how to do this. Same thing's going to happen with this. The difference is that when a captain in 2025 gets a great idea, if I could just write a piece of software that would really help me out, they're going to be able to do that in 6 months to a year instead of having to wait for a 3 or 4 year block upgrade. And that's going to be the huge difference with this platform.
All three terrific answers. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I don't have any more time, but thank you for being here again. Appreciate it.
Colonel Cook is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to be the cynic here. And once again, at least with me, I'm not as smart as you guys. If you're going to talk with a bunch of acronyms that I don't understand, right away my eyes start to gloss over. And if you could kind of keep it simple, stupid for me, I'd appreciate it a little bit. You know, I'm probably one of the biggest hawks on this committee, but it bothers me about things in the future and the amount of money. And maybe I've had too many briefs about the number of missiles that the Chinese are going to throw against aircraft carriers and cruisers and what have you. And they're going to build as many as, you know, maybe one aircraft carrier, they might be able to build, I don't know, 5,000 missiles. And I'm just looking at it from the CPA standpoint. Maybe that's, and that's ironic because I'm an infantry guy, but in terms of by the time you get there and the changes in technology, I don't know if we can do that, predict the future. I'm still upset that we cut back on the F-22s. I thought it was a great airplane. I think everybody's going back, oh, we shouldn't have done that. Well, we did that. It was a mistake. And can you tell me why, when the F-4 Phantom came out, we said, oh, we don't need any machine guns on that plane. This is going to be missile to missile. This is the new warfare. Now, this is talking to a ground guy in Vietnam that was probably saved because they modified that airplane before some of you were born. Let me correct that, before most of you in this room were born. But that was a failure to anticipate what was going on with the Air Force. And I am a big, big support of air power and what you have to do. I don't know if we can predict the future. I would hope that we could have modified the B-1 and the B-2. It scares me when you said we only were going to have 12 flights of B-2s. God almighty, with all the missiles of the Chinese, aren't the Russians still flying turboprop bombers around, scaring everybody when they come down the English Channel, or maybe that's, but how old is that aircraft? It's not as old as me, but close. And I'm saying they modified that, just like the Chinese. One of the figures I heard was what their budget was 300% in the last increase in the last 10 years. So I think when we're talking about some of these programs, and as I said, I've been around this planet a long while. I've seen the F-4, and I've seen that plant on the Connecticut River in the ranking member's district, where they spent, I don't know how much money, Pratt Whitney, to develop a nuclear engine for an airframe. I won't tell you how many years and how much money that went in. You can tell where that went. So I have some serious reservations about this. I think we've got to get it right. And I just hope, because the more you stick on there and everything else, it gets so expensive that it's going to fail the budgetary wars. And everybody's going to come down and say, what are we going to cut? And I still want more C-17s. I want more lift for Marines. They've got to go across the Pacific, and we can't do it. But you definitely got my attention when you said we're going to have 12 sorties of B-2s. We have a real problem. So I'm going to support it. I just want to make sure we do it right, and I'm going to And I notice your name, sir, is very, very close to how I feel right now, and maybe I'm the gunslinger here, and and you probably heard something comparable, but I don't have a question. I think what you're doing, but we've got to get this right. And the other thing is we don't have 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, because this is a very, very, very dangerous, and I wish we could do it just like that. If it was World War II, how long did it take to get the B-29 online? You know, when we had planes flying around at Pearl Harbor Day, the B-18, anyone ever seen that whatever happened to B-36, the B-47, the B-58 Hustler, I can go on and on and on. And I was a Marine, but I read a few Air Force books. So thank you very much for your presentation. Sorry I vocalized so much.
And Paul finishes that with, "Isn't that true?" That's his question. You know, so Mr. Knight's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I love the Colonel. He brings up a lot of good points, though. He does. You know, in the 50s, we built the Century series in about 5 years. Put F-100s in the air, put F-106s in the air in about a 5 or 6 year period. And I bring this up all the time, that building something today with today's knowledge and then thinking 30 years from now might not be the way we should do this. What we might want to do is look back at the 50s, look back at the 60s when we were building multiple aircrafts over a shorter time period. If we're going to build something today and fly the wings off it, we're going to fly the F-35 for 50 years. There is no doubt in my mind that we're going to do that. We're building a bomber right now that we're projecting probably for a 40 or 50 year time frame. And then probably in 20 years from now, we'll start talking about a new bomber. So I might ask that we think about a new strategy of not flying the wings off it, of not buying 100, and then when we need them or when they're down, and I have Edwards Air Force Base in my district, I get to watch the B-2 all the time because there's always 1 or 2 of them over there. That means if we have 20 of them and 2 of them are at the test facility, those are not 2 that are capable of going out. Then we have to refurbish, then we have to go through the whole process, and I've seen this. And I understand that we've learned a whole lot from the B-2 to what we're going to do with a long-range strike bomber with stealth technology, with the reapplication of the skin, with all of these types of technology. But I would just ask, if this is the proper, and I will support this as long as we keep the price down and it accomplishes the mission, but is this the proper stance that America should look at? Or maybe should we look at 2 or 3 aircraft in a 50-year time frame where they overlap, and we're not looking at a 10 or 12-year time period of when we're thinking about it, when we're building it, and when we're testing it, and then it goes IOC. Because this aircraft will not be in the air for that young captain to fly until about 2025. That means today, until then, we have the B-52, the Bone, and the B-2. So, that's my question.
Congressman Knight, your point is actually accurate, and I believe, not read in on the program, but based on everything I've heard about the program and in the public testimony, that, and why I keep referring back to this open mission systems and the open architecture. It's a physics problem, basically, to design a stealth platform in terms of plan, form, and the basic shape that actually makes it stealthy. There's other things you can add to it that make it stealthier. But in terms of adding the capabilities to the platform, in the past, the problem that we had was that if you were going to try to change these things, you had to break into the airplane basically to do it. What they've realized after the work, particularly with the B-2, was that they needed to have a way that they could make substantial capability improvements to the airplane, whether that was a weapon system. You got to remember, so much of this is involved with the code, but it also has to do with communications. If you need to put a new aperture, as they call it, a new antenna, an aperture on the plane, it would require this major amount of testing. They don't have the problem with this LRS-B, and they've already demonstrated, all 3 of the vendors involved with this have demonstrated their ability to comply with these open mission standards, and they have various different tests that show that they can make this work. So in effect, they're actually doing what you have suggested, because the airplane that's built in 2025 will be different than the one that's built in 2030 in terms of the capabilities it has. But the neat thing is that they'll be able to take the one that's built in 2025 and bring it up to that 2030 capability, because they can put the same software in because of the way that it's been designed in the first place.
And General, I'm not going to cut you off, but I'm going to grab some time here. I understand that, and software is what F-35, F-22, to much of the extent F-16 and F-15 do today. You cannot change the structure of an aircraft. So if I build the structure of an aircraft today, that will be the structure that I have in 2050. That will be it. So if something changes in that time period, that they can see our bombers quicker, or they can address our bombers quicker because of the structure, I'm stuck. I'm done. Now, I might be able to do some sort of software. I might be able to do some sort of jamming upgrades. But if something happens in the next 40 years that stops me from doing that because of the structure, I'm stuck.
Very quickly, sir, you're right. It's very difficult to change the plan form, the shape and size of an aircraft after it's been designed and produced. You can do things like give it new coatings. You can put maybe new leading edge treatments on it, things that can improve its stealth characteristics. You might also be able to do some things to give it active as well as passive measures and improve its ability to survive. But like we all understand, I believe, stealth is the product of active and passive measures, and not just one aircraft, but multiple platforms operating together, and to include cyber operations to create the environment where you defeat the enemy's kill chain, the air defense kill chain. And it's not remain invisible, but all you have to do is prevent him from getting a good shot.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the Chair letting me go over just a little bit. I understand that, and I will be highly supportive of this program, again, if we can stay within the budget and within the parameters that we've set for. I just think that this should be a discussion that we move forward with in the future, that we talk about these programs that overlap more than talking about a program that now the B-2 is 25 years old. I was there at the rollout, and I was there at the 25th anniversary. And now it is still our top bomber with 10 or 15 years from where we're going to get to the next bomber.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, we want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and as we mentioned at the outset to each of you, we'd love to give you some time to do a wrap-up of what you think we need to have on the record for this program. So we're going to give you that time now if you need it, and any clarifications for anything on the record or any additions, we'd love to hear from you at this time. And General, we'll once again start off with you, and we'll finish with Dr. Grant.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Chairman and committee, again, really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. This platform, I'm not read in on this platform. I was very familiar with the airplane that was going to be built in 2018, and they made a conscious decision at that time that they were going to lock in the requirements, and they were going to work with technologies that were well-known, well-developed. When I was still on active duty, in fact, I remember I had some great ideas myself that I said, this would be a great thing to have on this new airplane, and they said, we'll put it into the mix for a possible adaptation down the road, but it's not at a proper TRL level, the level of sophistication that we're willing to consider, because we only want to bring things into this platform that we know are going to work when we integrate them together. But at the same time, they said, don't worry, because we're building this airplane so that these new capabilities can be added later on. We've gone to great efforts to make sure they do that, and they've had programs to continue to do that. As Dr. Grant pointed on, the teams that developed the 2018 bomber, the Department of Defense right away provided money to keep those teams working, so as they put together the new, which then became the LRSB. So these teams have been consistent for a long period of time, which is part of the reason that I'm very confident that this airplane is going to have the great capabilities that we are attributing to it. And I also believe that it's going to have the adaptability. And from talking to people who are involved with the program, who say, I wish I could tell you about the program, I just tell you, it is just absolutely phenomenal, what they've done with this program. And I've talked to logisticians, and they said, who are usually the biggest ones to complain about a program, because they say they forgot about us. And they say, it's phenomenal. They thought about us. They thought about how to maintain it. there was been a big push to keep high mission capable rates, which means that you have to make it easy to maintain. All these things have been worked in. And so while I haven't been read into the program, the people I know that are very familiar with this, and I guarantee would have no qualms at all to complain to me if they thought there was an issue, are just ecstatic about this. But I've always liked to think myself, I grew up in Strategic Air Command, and I was someone who thought a lot about deterrence. And with the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a lot of people who thought that we did not need to think about deterrence anymore because we didn't have a Soviet Union. They were right that we didn't need to worry about the Soviet Union anymore, but they were wrong to think that we didn't need to worry about someone else coming and finding some way to attack us. We've had these various different ways. We've grown much more sophisticated in terms of our understanding of how to use military force in concert with other instruments of national power to be effective. And we've seen not only bombers, but all of our military force, but I'll try to highlight, the bombers, how they've been used in Bosnia, in Kosovo, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Iraq, to be able to do things that we typically don't think of about the airplanes doing. And again, this goes to those great captains who say, hey, I know what we can do with this airplane, and then you have some great strategic leaders or operational leaders that say, boy, now that you showed me we could do that, we can work this thing in, we can make it effective. The LRSB provides a platform. It's kind of like I like to use you buy an iPhone or you buy an Android, doesn't matter, and it gives you a capability to bring all these different apps that you can put on. And as Mr. Gunzinger was pointing out, these apps, there's a lot of apps. They can be electronic warfare apps, they can be ISR apps, they can be bombing apps, they might be cyber apps. All these things are possible because this particular platform was designed not only to be something that's easily adaptable, but it also was designed to be part of a family of systems. So this ability to interoperate with maritime forces, with ground forces, with space forces, it really is an important aspect of this. And whereas the B-2 was largely developed, initially at least, that it would try to go in alone and unafraid, and that's why you weren't going to see it because there wasn't much around. This time, they're recognizing you're going to want to use this platform in cases where people are looking for you. So you're just going to make it really difficult for them to pick you out. And because the plan form of this thing, that's the physics of it, it makes it very difficult for acquisition, and particularly for the radars that are actually used to target to be able to hit. But it's bringing in all of the different types of stealth. It's stealth across the entire electromagnetic spectrum to make this thing very hard to go through, as Mr. Guns, the kill chain. You can't, not just enough to see it, to actually put a weapon against it's going to be very difficult. And I believe from the people that I've talked to, although I can't personally witness to because I haven't seen it, but I believe that the nation is going to be very impressed when they see this airplane. And I believe that the department is going to be able to use this platform in conjunction with the Navy and the Army and the Marine Corps to do some very good things for national security for the nation.
Okay, thank you, General. Mr. Gunzinger?
Yes, very quickly. We did essentially end up with a silver bullet force in their B-2s in the 90s, and pretty much the F-22s. I would have continued production with that as well, because we devalued stealth. The air defense threat wasn't there, but today it is. And it's just going to be increasing in the future, and these technologies are proliferating. So stealth increasingly is going to be the price of admission into future fights. The second is long range and large payloads. Aircraft that can fly from more distant airfields out of the immediate threat of the short and medium range ballistic missiles and cruise missiles is going to be very important to us. That might reshape the kind of force we want in the future. The third, we've said it's been about 10 years since the 2006 QDR. It's going to be about another 10 years for LRSBs show up in numbers. That period could be longer. We focused on, should it be 80, 100, or something more, and I agree with my fellow witnesses that, yes, I think the number is eventually going to be much larger than that, but that's a 2020's decision. Of more importance to me is how quickly can we field this force. And if the yearly procurement rate is set pretty low due to budget problems, budget caps, budget constraints, then it's just going to extend into the future our long-range penetrating strike capability gaps. So that is something that you might focus on as well. Thank you.
And Dr. Grant, we're going to let you have the last word.
It comes down to two things. First, your excellent question. What happens if we don't get a new bomber? If we don't get a new bomber, our adversaries will hide and keep in sanctuary hostile military capabilities like anti-satellite weapons, like potential weapons of mass destruction. And these capabilities will threaten our national security and the world we live in, and we won't be able to do anything about it. Second question, should we buy this bomber, the one that is coming to down select? And I say yes, I think this is the one. But from what the Air Force has said, they have conducted more risk reduction, they've taken a new approach, and they've built on tremendous technologies from other programs. This is the one to buy. We can't afford the risk of waiting. Thank you very much.
We want to thank all three of you being here. We give you, as I told you before, an open invitation as you see this process, what Mr. Cook raised, Mr. Knight raised. Great questions. We actually posed some of these to them before this hearing because these are important things to do. Mr. Courtney and I recently were at some briefings, and I think we were both informed and both concluded that probably cutting that F-22 production line was one of the worst mistakes we made for national defense in some time. So we need to get these things correct and make sure that we're able to produce them. But we thank you for giving us your expertise, your wisdom, and your knowledge on this. And if no one has anything else, then we're adjourned.